Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate if you jump on here live here on this early Tuesday evening. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. Make sure to give the video a like, a thumbs up. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so and share the video on all social media platforms. Good evening, Keveron. Glad to have you here. And 9 times out of 10, just about every video that I do, my buddy Keveron's always the very first person to comment, and I really appreciate that. Keveron, always good to hear from you. But tonight we're going to talk some college football, and this list comes from the Athletic, and I'm going to explain to you why I'm going to talk about it and explain to you why it's even worth talking about. But it's the Athletic's ranking of most valuable to least valuable ACC teams currently, just their opinion of how much money each school in the ACC is worth. And the reason why it's even getting talked about, because normally nobody would care, but because of all this conference realignment and maybe more realignment, it gets brought up. One day last week, it may have been Wednesday maybe, or Tuesday during ACC media days, somebody said that there's a new rumor going around that North Carolina is going to go to the SEC. So, of course, that's why it gets brought up, because now they're telling you how much money North Carolina would bring the SEC if they go. They're not number one in the conference. But I was listening to some sports people, and they said that they had talked to somebody in the SEC that's in the know, and they said that the only reason, hey there, Witty, glad to have you here. The only reason, hey there, Lucas, glad to have you here, that they're really not pushing to get Clemson. I'm fantastic, Lucas. Hopefully you are as well, is because even though it makes the most sense getting Clemson since they're, right smack dab in the middle of the South, even though now where you're located really doesn't matter, but let's pretend like it does. Hey there, Eddie. Glad to have you back. You're going to enjoy this list because we're talking some college football. That even though Clemson is right smack dab in the middle of the SEC country, and they play 2 or 3 SEC teams every year already, that the big reason the SEC doesn't want them is because the SEC is trying to make more money, of course. Hey there, GH. Glad to have you here. And they don't feel like adding Clemson would help them much in the long run, because they're wanting fans to get the SEC network, and that way, if you don't have it currently, you're getting more fans that are getting hooked on the way football is in the South. And most people in South Carolina already have the SEC network because it's available on just about every cable package because of South Carolina. So they feel like, well, bringing in Clemson outside of, putting them in our conference doesn't help us any extra, because everybody in the state already has the network because of South Carolina. No, GH, Vanderbilt's about the only team in the SEC that actually cares about going to school anymore. They're the only school that really even truthfully list what their school GPA is, because they're the only school that actually takes sports halfway serious and puts the main focus on academics. And that's really the sole reason why they're still in the SEC, is because of academics, because the conference as a whole has to reach a certain academic standard. And if you take Vanderbilt out, that conference ain't reaching that standard. But if it's academics, Vanderbilt would probably be, heck, I don't know, maybe in the Atlantic Sun, maybe even the 1AA school. I really don't know, but they keep them around because of their academic standing because they actually take academics serious. Let's go ahead and talk about the athletics ranking of most valuable to least valuable ACC teams as far as money. Number one is Florida State, $867 million. Number two is Clemson at $665 million. Hey there, Snowbird. Glad to have you here. Number three is Miami at $604 million. And then number four is North Carolina with $572 million. And Snowbird, I'm glad you asked that. But believe it or not, I don't follow YouTube enough to know how do you make mods. So if I have any, I don't know how they became mods. I haven't assigned anybody to that position because I'm not convinced it actually helps the channel. So that's why I've never done it. And GH, stick around. You'll find out whether or not Boston College is last. And you may be shocked to know the answer of who is last. Number five is Virginia Tech at $455 million. And then we have NC State at $445 million. Louisville, $350 million. Georgia Tech, $340 million. Syracuse, $329 million. And then number 10 is Duke with $323 million. And then that's the top 10. And now let's talk about the bottom of the conference. Number 11 is Pittsburgh, $303 million. Virginia, $257 million. Stanford at $202 million. SMU, $178 million. GH's first prediction of Boston College, they're not last, they're 15th with $172 million. And then we have California at $158 million, and dead last with only $124 million that they're worth, according to The Athletic, is the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest is probably going to be last or next to last for the foreseeable future, even though I could be wrong, but I think the football coach they hired is going to end up being the right call, the right decision. I think he's going to be a good one for them. I think they may surprise some folks this year because some folks have them picked dead last this year. I don't think they're going to be dead last, but we'll find out. But, you know, they're right there what they call Tobacco Road with Duke, North Carolina, and NC State. All three of those are better programs. And Wake Forest, back when I was growing up when they had Tim Duncan and Randolph Childress, they had a good basketball team, but they haven't really been decent in basketball for the most part in 25 years. And they're no good at football anymore. They're decent at baseball, but outside of that, I mean, you know, they have nothing. So when you're competing in the area with Duke, North Carolina, and NC State, and those three programs are pretty much better than you in every sport, you're going to be last or next to last. But SMU being down there shouldn't surprise anybody because even though, you know, they were on the verge of the football playoffs last year and may get close to getting back this year, you know, they joined the ACC and said that, you know, they're not going to ask for any money from the ACC for, I want to say it's 10 years or right at 10 years. So when you're in the conference and you're not bringing in money, you're not going to be worth a whole lot. So that's why they're 14th, but they're still ahead of Boston College, California, and Wake Forest, and we'll find out whether or not I'm correct. And I'm not saying Wake Forest is going to win 9 games this year, but I don't think they're going to be dead last in the conference. I think they're better than California. I think they're better than Boston College. Might even be better than Stanford. I would argue that Wake Forest is similar to Vandy in that aspect. Wake Forest is a pretty good school with a terrible football program. They are, for the most part, terrible, GH. They had a couple of good years whenever it was 20 or so years ago when they had Jim Grove. They had their first ever 11-win season. They were really good. And then when Dave Clawson came along, they had a couple of 8 or 9 win seasons, but they've never been a consistent top 10 program. Probably never will be. But the one thing you can say about Wake Forest that you can't say about Vanderbilt is not every year. Now, early, back in the Jefferson Pilot days when the ACC was 9 teams, Wake Forest had a quarterback, I think Rusty LaRue was his name. Jim Caldwell was their coach. Back in those days, they were lucky to be 3-8 back when we had 11 games in a season. 3-8, 4-7 was about the best they'd do. But ever since Jim Grove came along and they've gone through the Jim Grove years and the Dave Clawson years, they're usually, up until last year, they're usually good enough to go to a bowl game. Now, I know we've got enough bowl games now to where just about everybody goes. Before we had 112 bowl games, Wake Forest was still, most years, a 6 or 7 win football team. Vanderbilt, most of the time, is not even good enough for a bowl game. But I do agree with you as fact is they're about on the same level outside of that. But now Vanderbilt has an exceptional baseball team. Wake Forest has been pretty good the last couple of years, but up until the last couple of years, they've been terrible at baseball. But Vanderbilt, the one thing they do have that's consistent is a baseball program, and that's because a former Clemson assistant coach is their head coach. Any thoughts on any of this, please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. My wife told me, I forgot to tell you to get deodorant. And I said, okay, I'll make a pit stop. This might sound crazy, but I grew up as a dual fan of Georgia and Florida State. I remember Wake Forest getting tossed when I was a kid. Wake Forest have always struggled in conference. They have, and I remember, you and I might be close to the same age there, GH, because I can remember when, as I said a while ago, the Jefferson Pilot days were around, and they carried a game every Saturday at noon. You had Mike Hogwood on the sidelines, and then you had Steve Martin, not the actor, the play-by-play guy, Steve Martin, and then you had Richard Doc Walker doing color commentary, and there was only 9 teams in the conference back then. And even though back in those days, you would think, since there wasn't 45 channels that carried football like there is today, you would think that being the noon game on Jefferson Pilot is what you wanted, because that way you were guaranteed to be on TV. But you didn't want that, because the noon game on Jefferson Pilot was generally Florida State against Wake Forest, or Florida State against Duke. It was always a really good team against an awful team. But I can remember a couple times they carried Wake Forest and North Carolina, or Wake Forest and Duke, who were 2 teams that were pretty comparable, because both teams were absolute garbage. And I'm pretty sure Wake Forest quarterback's name was Rusty LaRue, and their head coach's name was Jim Caldwell, who later coached in the NFL. And they were 3-8 and 4-7. And I remember watching them thinking, boy, this team is flat out awful. I mean, they were absolutely embarrassing. And their stadium was not that big, and they couldn't even half fill a small stadium. With how bad they were for a long time. But then when Jim Grove came along, ever since then they've been pretty consistent up until the last year or so. And then, of course, Dave Clawson left. But Dave Clawson said it's because with the NIL stuff now that Wake Forest just can't afford to pay what the other programs can pay. So Dave Clawson got out because he was winning. He didn't want his reputation of winning, to be destroyed by having 3 or 4 straight bad seasons. He went ahead and left, but he said, we just don't have the money these big-time programs have, and that's why they were so bad the last couple of years. But Dave Clawson took them to bowl games like, I think, 7 straight years, and that's unheard of at Wake Forest. But until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, Life can be over by the count of three. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.